The following program is exclusively produced by Big Head Amusements for KQEK Digital.
You know, I actually started in a band, as many film and TV composers these days seem to start in bands. I was in a band called Mango Groove, which in South Africa was one of the biggest selling pop bands in South African music history. It was a blend of Afro-pop and one of the first sort of multiracial bands at the time of the end of apartheid. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for 7 or 8 years, and then I really wanted to get into film, and I won a Fulbright scholarship to USC in the USC Film School in LA, which was how I originally came to America. And the original intention actually was to write and direct. And kind of what happened is I just realized that I really liked scoring films, and landed up kind of scoring the short films of a lot of directors that I actually work with today. Mm-hmm. A lot of people kind of refer to the USC mafia in the entertainment industry, and it's kind of true to a degree. Actually, a lot of people you meet at school you land up working with over the years, and I just made a lot of contacts and landed up scoring their films and put the two together and became a film scorer.
I guess, was that a difficult decision for you to switch to film composing, or was that sort of an easy decision simply because of the passion?
I think it was a pretty easy decision all around. Having played in the band for 7 or 8 years, it was really great. We toured around a lot. I think we went to 15 or 20 countries around the world. But, the grind of kind of being out on the road does get a bit much after a while, especially as you're playing the same songs again and again and again. Mm-hmm. So to be honest, I haven't really missed performing live since I started scoring for film and TV. I like being in my studio. I like getting to do lots of different work all the time. So.
And then for your feature films, like what to you sort of was the most significant moment when you realized that your career was underway? Because, as I mentioned, you have done television as well as feature films. And for myself, my first exposure to your work was Jerusalema.
Oh, really? You saw that, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's great. Let me think back. I wouldn't say there was any specific moment. I think as any film and TV composer will tell you, it's like such an up and down career. It's a real roller coaster. So you tend to have very exciting moments when everything is coming together, and then you kind of had dry patches. It's very much like a feast or famine career, as most things in the entertainment industry are. So I've been lucky enough the last probably 6-7 years I've been working very, very constantly, but before then it was moments when it seemed like everything was going well, and moments when I was like, I wish I'd studied to be something else. But yeah, I'd say actually probably when I wrote music for Sex and the City, ever since then things have been just going well, I would say. I think having that credit gave me a certain degree of respect. It's such a credit-based thing. People kind of assess you on what credits you have, and when you have a major film or TV credit on American, TV or on American theaters, from then on, people take you more seriously, I think,
I think also, I guess with Sex and the City, because it was such a long-running series, it must have instilled like a really strong work ethic, because you have no choice but to constantly sort of time manage everything so carefully.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. And I think television in general is a very, very compressed schedule these days. I think post-production is a lot quicker than it used to be, and people just expect stuff to be done very, very quickly and sound great. You can't deliver any substandard work. And I think that's, the technology's kind of forced those changes. You have to be really on top of the technology and be able to deliver very, very quickly.
I think Jerusalema is the only feature film score of yours that I've actually seen and heard, but it made a strong impression because I liked the diversity of instrumentation that was in the score. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about being involved in the film, what the film means to you, and some of the musicians that you work with in that, because it's got a really great percussion section.
Oh, thank you so much. I'd say it was probably one of the best, if not the best, experiences I've had on a movie, just because I worked very, very closely with the director, Ralph Seaman, who's a very, very good friend of mine. He gave me a lot of creative freedom, and he also gave clear direction. I think it's very important when you're working with the director that you need to know what they want. I think directors that can't give you a clear picture, it's often a struggle to work with. What I was excited about what we did musically on Jerusalema is we combined a lot of African musicians, which we recorded in South Africa, with an orchestra which we recorded here in LA. And you're basically looking at two very, very completely different ways of working. The African musicians that I worked with, fantastic musicians. Many of them don't read. We worked in a very improvisational way, which I think is true of a lot of African music. So we got together, let me try and think back just to describe the sessions to you. We worked with a 12-piece percussion section, which was comprised actually of drummers and percussionists from all over Africa, from South Africa, from Ghana, from Nigeria. And what's very interesting is each of those different traditions from the different countries, in fact, have quite different rhythmic traditions as well. And it took a little while sometimes to get them working together rhythmically, particularly the Ghanaian guys. Ghana is just fascinating musically. I still struggle to wrap my head around the types of rhythms that those guys play and where they feel the beat. It's a really unique style. So we got the session together in M1, which is a huge recording stage in Johannesburg at SABC, which is the National Broadcasting Corporation. And it was actually recorded back in, it was built back in the 70s to record orchestras. And I think it's the first time we put a huge drum section in there, and it's just got a wonderful ambience. So it was really exciting working with those guys. We spent about 2 days just making a whole bunch of different loops and different styles of percussion for the movie. I also worked with a fantastic musician called Moshoeu Ketlele. Let me spell that for you. It's Mosoeu. That's Moshoeu. And then his last name is Ketlele. Ketlele. He's an amazing guy. He's kind of made a career out of basically sourcing really unique ethnic instruments out of South Africa. He was in fact born and raised in Soweto, so he's kind of a city guy actually. But he went back to all the rural areas and found the instruments that a lot of the tribal guys were using and became an expert at playing all of them. And I spent a wonderful few days with him and some of his other musicians just working, again, very, very improvisationally, trying to figure out sounds and instruments that would sound good for Jerusalema. And so after those sessions, I had, huge amounts of recording of all of that stuff. I brought it back to LA with me and worked extensively in Pro Tools with it, kind of matching it up to picture, figuring out what worked against the picture. And it's really thanks to the marvels of modern technology that I was able to sync all of that stuff up with a Hollywood orchestra, which works in a very, very different way to the guys I used in South Africa. Obviously with an orchestra you need very, very specifically written charts. If stuff is not written exactly according to store, they don't want to play it. There's no improvisation in an orchestral session. And basically I constructed tempo maps for all of the really unique rhythms we'd created in South Africa, and I wrote orchestral parts on top of those rhythms, and then we orchestrated them and recorded them here at the Eastwood recording stage in the Warner Brothers lot, and put it all together. And it was just so exciting hearing the orchestral and the African stuff come together. And I think it just provided a really unique ambience for the movie. The director was very, very excited.
And I don't know if this is just unique to today, if it was something that was easily done years ago, where components of a score were recorded in different countries and then they were assembled together. But maybe it's much easier now because literally once you have it digitally, you can just take it anywhere, and there's so many different kinds of software that you can use to manipulate it and integrate it, shape it into a totally different palette, if not a totally different cultural background, like you mentioned, for the more classically oriented North American scoring style.
I think that's very true. I think it would have been difficult to do even 10 years ago. I think it would have been possible, but a lot more difficult than it is today. I regularly work with musicians and composers all over the world. I send them, sessions back and forth via the internet. They send me recorded stuff back from the internet. It's really kind of made the world a much smaller place. Lalela Music, which is my music library, probably also would not have been possible 10 years ago, just the way we bringing in stuff from composers around the world, recording musicians around the world, and kind of putting it all together. It's really only possible because of what the internet's done,
For the website, like what actually was the genesis for the site? Because I sort of get the impression that perhaps you realize with all the people that you work with, there's just so much talent that is being overlooked.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think over the years I'd built up a lot of relationships with different composers and different musicians. And I think the thing I noticed is production music libraries were getting used a lot more than they used to be, particularly in television. Because post-production schedules on TV have got so compressed, and also because there's just such a proliferation of TV networks around the world. You know, in the US, we obviously have 400 TV networks probably. If you include all the cable ones, they all need music. They all need it very, very quickly. And often it's basically turned out to be a better thing for a lot of those networks to be using production music libraries rather than hiring composers. And obviously, as a composer, I had mixed feelings about that because I still think, you know, hiring a specific composer for a show or a movie is going to get you the best result. But I also understood the constraints that people were under in terms of schedule and budget. And this basically forced a change. A surprisingly large percentage of TV shows are using production music libraries these days. And because they've become so ubiquitous, I think a lot of composers have realized they kind of need a hand in that pie, as it were. Mm-hmm. And that was part of the motivation for me, that I wanted something which would work concurrently with my career as a scorer, but, you know, just allow my music to kind of get up there in just a very, very focused way. And just the opportunity to work with a lot of different composers. It kind of evolved 4 or 5 years ago. We got a group of investors together and put the whole thing together. And it's just been really exciting seeing how rapidly it's moved forward. We have sub-publishers in 37 different countries now. And what I kind of discovered is in each of those countries, there's a specific sub-publisher working with production music libraries. They work very closely with the broadcasters in that country. And again, it was the same year as in the U.S. A lot of TV shows are using production music these days, and it's kind of no longer a dirty word. I think 10 years ago, you know, people looked at library music, and I know I myself did. I kind of looked down on library music a little bit, because often it was not of that good quality. But I think particularly over the last 5 years, that's really changed. You have top composers, even guys like Hans Zimmer have written stuff for like Extreme Music, which is another production music library. And there's a sense that there's a lot of really great quality stuff in there. As a composer myself, I've realized there are kind of advantages and disadvantages to writing for production music. Obviously, you don't have that joy of writing to picture, which is one of the things I just find, you know, so rewarding. At the same time, it's quite liberating. Writing music completely freely without the picture there and knowing it's going to be synced to picture at a later stage, you kind of have a lot of creative license. And a lot of the composers that we've hired for La Lela have also noted that. They've been surprised by how much they've enjoyed it, you know?
Well, in the cues themselves, like I've noticed that there are a number of alternates that are offered for several of the cues. And for you as a composer, do you essentially write the one piece and then afterwards sort of look at it and say, okay, what components can I take away so that it still stands on its own but conveys a different mood?
Exactly. I mean, you nailed it exactly. I generally, and most of the composers we do this, they'll write the sort of full orchestration, and then they'll experiment with just kind of taking things out. And, you know, it's often amazing, you know, with the technology, the way you can control individual elements so strongly today. Just taking out the rhythm or taking out the pads or taking out the strings, or it's very easy to create different mixes, and they often sound really, really good. It's a very fun stage of the process, actually, when you experiment with just taking things out and seeing what stands on its own, you know?
For yourself, did you find that you discovered that you always have sort of a unique business acumen? Because it's not many composers who are able to balance the creative and the business sides.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think there's always been a bit of a tussle within me besides the between the creative and the business side. I've always kind of enjoyed the business side, but then I also find when I spend too much time on business, I start getting very frustrated, and I long to be in my studio. So right now I feel like it's a really good balance. I probably spend about 70% of my time being a creative person, and then I spend 20 to 30% of my time doing business stuff, which is kind of enjoyable. And it's also just been really great. You know, composers are such a unique, quirky group of people, and the composers I've met through La Lela, I think we've hired 50 or 60 different composers at this point. They're all really unique, and they all give you a unique perspective, and they're all very passionate people. And it's just been an honor and a pleasure to encounter all those people. And actually also just to meet our sub-publishers around the world has been great. I feel like I have friends in all these different countries, and that's also been very rewarding. That's part of the business stuff that I really enjoy.
And then just sort of a final observation, like you mentioned, sort of at one point in time, library music was sort of lesser regarded by people, but I think it is fair to say that perhaps over the last 10 years that there has sort of been a change in that. And as sort of a collector and a film fan as well, I wonder if that might also have been mandated by certain classic films that years later it was discovered they were in fact, they had library music, but then when they discovered who wrote the music and when that music was heard separately from the film in several subsequent CD collections, you realize how unique the music was. And the fact that the music wasn't written by hacks, it was written by very talented composers with some really interesting backgrounds.
Absolutely. No, I think that's absolutely true. I think, even just the way guys like Quentin Tarantino sort of reused score from old movies and stuff, essentially what they were doing was, using library music,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that along with the fact that songs have become much more ubiquitous in movies over the last 10 or 20 years, and also just that scores have become much more of a pastiche anyway. When I first started off as a composer, I had this idea that a film score needed to be a very unified thing, that it needed to have specific themes and specific orchestration throughout. And I wouldn't say I've moved away from that view entirely, but I have a much more, this is going to sound pretentious, but I'm going to use the word anyway, I have a sort of a more postmodern concept of what a movie score is. I think it's kind of cool for a score to be quite fragmented and use music from a lot of different places. You look at even a movie like Babel, there's a number of composers on that score, a number of different styles. If you listen to all the pieces of music in a movie like that, you wouldn't necessarily see connections with them, yet when you watch it in the context of the movie, it works fantastically, and they are connected.
Mm-hmm.
And I think library fits into that general sort of change in the way that movie scores work today. I think we bombarded by media messages from so many different things, from movies, from television, from the internet. We tend to accept a much more fragmented sort of cultural aesthetic, and I think libraries fit right into that,
For related film and film music reviews, please visit KQEK.com. This program is copyright 2013 by Mark R. Hassan.